To understand it, we first have to recognize light at an atomic level. At its most basic form, light is seen as a series of particles called photons. They are created as excess energy packets when an atom's electrons suddenly gain and lose energy. When an atom is energized, its electrons shift further away from its core. When the energy stops, the electron returns to its natural orbit, releasing built-up energy as a photon. By repeatedly energizing atoms, it's possible to generate a steady stream of light energy. In a light bulb, the energy source needed to energize the atoms is provided via electricity traveling through its base, electricity simply being the movement of free electrons. The key component that made Edison's design so groundbreaking was the filament at its center. Being the most important part of a light bulb, it's the size of the filament that determines the intensity of the light emitted. In an everyday bulb, the filament is about 50 centimeters long, but is coiled down to a smaller size, then coiled again, leaving a 2 to 3 centimeter piece in its place. Tungsten is usually chosen for its extremely high melting point. Electrons burst through the filament, but because it's so tightly coiled, they'll frequently fly off and bump into each other, causing the filament to light up and become extremely hot. All this takes place inside an airtight bulb. If the reaction were to take place in open air, the heat generated would be enough to ignite the surrounding oxygen, destroying the filament. However, in a vacuum, when the filament is heated, the vibrating tungsten atoms occasionally break off. If enough do this, the filament splits and the light bulb is broken. To counter this, the empty bulb is packed full of an inert gas such as argon or krypton. With the gas, any atoms that break off bounce off the gas atoms and rejoin the filament, effectively quadrupling the bulb's life. Although incandescent light bulbs are a staple of modern technology, they've been proven to be very inefficient. An everyday light bulb produces about 20% visible light, with 5% released as light outside our visible spectrum, such as ultraviolet and infrared. The rest is produced as heat, leaving the bulb red hot. There are three main components to an incandescent lamp: the free-moving electrons traveling through its base, the airtight gas bulb filled with inert gas, and the tightly woven tungsten wire at its center. All working together releases billions of photons, observed as visible light.
One of the most common ways to generate light nowadays is by using a light-emitting diode or LED. Like the rest of the diodes, as we saw in a previous video, one of its characteristics is that it only allows the passage of electric current in one direction. But we didn't talk about why they emit light, so in this video we will see how an LED works. On the other hand, if we reverse the polarity of the voltage source, the free electrons of the N-type semiconductor will be able to jump through the P-type semiconductor and close the circuit, allowing the passage of the current. This case is known as direct polarization, and it is precisely here that the physical phenomenon that produces the emission of light occurs. If we return to our visualization of the atomic structure, and we focus exactly on the point in which the two semiconductors make contact, we are going to find that electrons are being moved from an atom with more valence electrons to an atom with fewer valence electrons. This is extremely important, because this difference in the amount of valence electrons is also related to the amount of energy that they possess. In other words, an electron that is in an atom with 5 valence electrons has more energy than another electron in an atom with 3 valence electrons. This means that, every time an electron crosses this junction, there is energy that is being lost. But, as the law of conservation of energy says, energy cannot be created nor destroyed, it can only be transformed. And in this case, the energy that the electrons lost when jumping from one atom to another became light, or more specifically, photons. The fact that this happens at the atomic level has another implication. Since electrons move always from an atom A to an atom B, the amount of energy transformed in each jump will be constant, which in practical terms means that the emitted light will always have the same wavelength spectrum. This also implies that, by changing atoms A and B, that is, the impurities within semiconductors, we can emit lights with different spectra. Referring specifically to the visible spectrum, we can emit different light colors.
Solar panels are made up of smaller units called solar cells. The most common solar cells are made from silicon, a semiconductor that is the second most abundant element on Earth. In a solar cell, crystalline silicon is sandwiched between conductive layers. Each silicon atom is connected to its neighbors by 4 strong bonds, which keep the electrons in place so no current can flow. Here's the key. A silicon solar cell uses 2 different layers of silicon. An N-type silicon has extra electrons, and P-type silicon has extra spaces for electrons, called holes. Where the 2 types of silicon meet, electrons can wander across the p-n junction, leaving a positive charge on one side and creating negative charge on the other. You can think of light as the flow of tiny particles called photons shooting out from the sun. When one of these photons strikes the silicon cell with enough energy, it can knock an electron from its bond, leaving a hole. The negatively charged electron and location of the positively charged hole are now free to move around. But because of the electric field at the p-n junction, they'll only go one way. The electron is drawn to the n side, while the hole is drawn to the p side. The mobile electrons are collected by thin metal fingers at the top of the cell. From there, they flow through an external circuit, doing electrical work like powering a light bulb, before returning through the conductive aluminum sheet on the back. Each silicon cell only puts out half a volt, but you can string them together in modules to get more power. 12 photovoltaic cells are enough to charge a cell phone, while it takes many modules to power an entire house. Electrons are the only moving parts in a solar cell, and they all go back where they came from. There's nothing to get worn out or used up, so solar cells can last for decades.
Despite the level of sophistication in today's digital cameras, image acquisition remains relatively the same amongst the majority of consumer products. When a photon of light bounces or is emitted from a source, it travels through the air and enters the front element of a lens. From there, the light is shaped and modified according to the specifications of the lens manufacturer. Upon exiting the lens, the photon is directed towards an imaging sensor with a wide surface of photosites that absorb the photon, converting it to an electrical signal. The inherent amount of photons hitting the photosite indicate how bright a given pixel will be. For color images, color filters are placed over the photosite to only allow either red, green, or blue wavelengths to be measured. The photosite then sends the electrical signal through a series of circuit boards and processors. Each camera manufacturer has their own method of calculating an image, but in the end, a computer screen displays the measured color and luminance of the final image. And all those pixels together allow us to see a copy of a moment frozen in time.